Thank you. We spent something like 8 years at YASA way back in 80s. That time also we came up with a book called Energy in a Finite World. It was up to 2035, and now YASA is working till 2100. But what we have done here is the Indian perspectives of these scenarios and what kind of energy transitions that we expect in India. So this is a project, joint collaborative project with IASA, TIFAC and IRADE. TIFAC is the DST's Technology, Innovation and Forecasting is an organization that they have done in New Delhi. Now, GEA scenarios are at regional level where there is no decision making. There is a South Asia region who makes decisions for South Asia. So it is necessary to check some of these results at country level and get concrete feedback, and that's what we did. Luckily it was easy for us. I think similar thing can be also done for China and USA, where the India's share for South Asia was 80 to 90% on many of the indicators. So firstly we began that exercise and then scaled it accordingly. What does India get out of this also is much more. India's objectives would be that let us look at the different global scenarios that GEA has and their implications from India's perspective. Country scenarios can be consistent with global resource situation. Right now, when people do modeling work in India, they assume that whatever they can't find in India, they will import. But when it is a global model, you have a finite resources shared by all regions, and so it's not so easy to get free lunches. Assess macroeconomic impacts in terms of GDP, welfare, poverty, sectoral production for sustainable development targets, CO2 pathways, of course, that's the main thing. And this way we develop energy technology futures and understand the kind of transitions that energy sector needs till 2050. So the introduction to the IRADE model that we had is developed some time back for the Ministry of Environment and Forest also. It was a multi-sectoral model to elaborate implications for India on CO2 constraints, carbon constraints. IRADE model features are that it has an input-output framework, so it's in some sense there are sectoral details, and so it also models macroeconomic picture, but at the same time we have 10 consumer classes, so it's a bottom-up, top-down model with specific technologies and macroeconomic closure. It covers the whole economy. It's a multi-period model, optimization from 2010 to 2050. And we have 9 electricity generation technologies and 20 expenditure classes, 10 rural and 10 urban. So we did actually 4 scenarios. 3 were from, business as usual is BOW, National Energy Mission Targets from PM's National Action Plan for Climate Change, and several other energy policy decisions which are already taken are also put in there. Then we took power sector emissions from the GEA scenarios and we constrained our scenario emissions of power sector at that level. And as you know, GEA scenarios are 2-degree temperature compatible. So what is the role in India in this 2-degree scenario, global scenario I mean, that can be seen in this. So GEA India numbers are derived using India's share in the GEA high demand scenario. So we started with GEA high demand scenario because that kind of matched much more with the kind of India's current scenarios. We have also India's energy policy till 2035 and so on, 2031 and 2. So all these were sort of converging, so we took it high demand instead of all scenarios. So the results are now started to discuss them. We found that there's not that much difference between business as usual and the national policies. But if you constrain India's power emissions to the level that GEA scenarios require, then our, and by the way, GDP growth rate is endogenous in this model, so we get down to 6%, which is what IASA assumes. IASA has a predetermined economic growth rate, whereas in our case, the model derives it. So we, and you can see the growth, GDP growth rates down in a small table there, from almost 8% to coming down to 7%. CO2 emissions, business as usual, are quite high, but power constraints in PEC, we call it, is considerably much less. However, IASA has the lower one, the reduction is much stronger, partly because they have much more than power sector emissions, plus they have many transport options. And already the demand is lower than India is assuming and expecting. I mean, the GDP growth is lower. So we have per capita emissions also. It comes down to actually 6 tons, and GEA gets a reduction of 5 tons from transport sector, and also it has a lower GDP growth rate than IASA, than Iranian model. Poverty, as I described, you have 10 income classes, expenditure classes, and poverty is reducing virtually, but there is no impact much on poverty, as emission constraints are much more, turns much severe after 2030, and before that, poverty is already reduced as we know it today. Of course, the poverty definition can be dynamic and keep changing. The sources of primary energy in both the models, GEA has 2 more, geothermal and synthetic fuel, that's the primary energy sources. We didn't keep them in this one. But there are many more technologies in GEA model on transportation and as you can see with CCS and basically carbon capture and storage is a major distinction in GEA scenarios. So we have shares of sources of electricity in 2050. As you remember, both are achieving the same reduction, but Iranian model achieves it differently by doing more solar PV and more nuclear. The red bars are Iranian model. Blue is the GEA high demand, and there is, you can see, IASA has, GEA has much more on coal plus CCS, gas plus CCS, carbon capture and storage, so on. So CCS plays major role in GEA scenarios. But could it be due to comparison of capital cost? Well, not so much. We could see our costs that we usually use in India are similar to what GEA using for South Asia. GEA South Asia, so a slight difference could be there. Plus, we might think of more manpower component may be lower in some of the cases. So you can see that India expects much lower hydro costs than GEA does because of perhaps lower labor and vice versa. Solar CSP plus storage, India expects much higher, and so on and so forth. So there is a difference, slight difference, and that is also responsible for difference in how we get there. But the reduction is by the same types of same amount. And so now just the energy sector investment, you can see that in 2050, the business as usual has much lower investment of about 100 billion US dollars, whereas the power constraint scenarios would require to almost 275 billion. So huge investments are required for making this transition. And so concluding comments are on two fronts. One is that the Irade model is restricted to existing, means currently what we see in India, not hydrogen and CCS and so on, but therefore coal use in 2050 is small because most of it is small, nuclear and so on. But if we had CCS, perhaps coal use would have been higher. Iranian model achieves similar power emissions reductions as GEA, but with nuclear and large emphasis on solar PV. If transport emissions were included by us, Iranian, GDP would have been perhaps lower also, and but GEA scenario has already predetermined the exogenous risk. So energy sector investment, I showed you already the Iranian model results, but the right-hand side is the GA results for South Asia. And they are very similar, surprisingly. 2010-2050, they come up to $8,000 million, and if you consider that over 40 years, it comes to certainly something similar. So the last conclusion is on the energy investment side, which shows that the importance of better technologies to reach the climate goals. But we need access to these technologies and financial resources. As we saw that two model expect similar energy sector emission reductions, but they also expect very similar amounts of investments in 2050. So I think that it's nice to see that such a regional model, 11 world regions they had, and can be also used at a country level. Irade also, GA also needs some country level verifications, I imagine. So it's good for both the parties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we are running out of time, so I request now